Sarah Martinez grew up in a small Texas town where Friday night football games drew bigger crowds than Sunday church services. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old. By 12, she could hit a target at 200 yards with iron sights. By 16, she was outperforming boys twice her size at the local shooting range. The military had always been her dream. While other girls her age were planning prom dates, Sarah was planning her future in uniform. She studied military history, memorized weapon specifications, and trained her body like a machine. Every morning before school, she ran 5 miles through the dusty back roads of her hometown. Every afternoon, she practiced with her father's rifle until the sun disappeared behind the mesquite trees. When Sarah turned 18, she walked into the Army recruitment office with confidence that matched her perfect test scores. The recruiter, Sergeant Williams, looked impressed as he reviewed her physical fitness results and aptitude scores. Everything pointed to success. Her marksmanship scores were off the charts. Her leadership potential was obvious. Her determination was unshakable. But there was one problem that no amount of training could overcome. Sarah was a woman, and in 2010, women were banned from direct combat roles. The rules were clear, written in military policy that seemed as permanent as stone. Women could serve in support roles, medical units, intelligence, and logistics. They could risk their lives in countless ways, but they could not officially engage the enemy on the front lines. The recruiter explained the limitations with an apologetic tone. Sarah could become a military police officer, a communications specialist, or work in supply chains. All important jobs, he assured her, all vital to military operations. But the infantry, the special forces, the combat arms branches remained. Closed doors with signs that read, "No women allowed." Sarah felt something break inside her chest as she listened to the restrictions. This wasn't about her abilities or her dedication. This was about rules written by people who had never seen her shoot, never watched her outrun male athletes, never witnessed her tactical thinking during training exercises. The system was telling her that her gender mattered more than her skills. She signed up anyway, choosing military police as her specialty. It was the closest she could get to combat operations while staying within the rules. At least as an MP, she might see some action, might have opportunities to prove herself in dangerous situations. She told herself it was just a stepping stone, a way to get her foot in the door of a system that needed time to change. Basic training was everything Sarah expected and more. She excelled in every category, often outperforming male recruits who had assumed she would struggle. Her drill sergeants took notice of her natural leadership abilities and her refusal to quit under pressure. During night exercises, she moved through the forest like a ghost. On the shooting range, her accuracy was legendary among her training class. Other female recruits looked up to Sarah as an inspiration. She helped them when they struggled, pushed them when they wanted to quit, and showed them that women belonged in uniform just as much as men. But even as she succeeded in training, Sarah felt the weight of limitations pressing down on her dreams. The male recruits respected her abilities, but some made comments about how she would never see real combat. They talked about their future, assignments in infantry units, their plans to become rangers or special forces operators. Sarah listened to their excitement about opportunities she was forbidden to pursue, no matter how qualified she might be. Her instructors praised her tactical thinking during war game exercises. When her team faced complex scenarios, Sarah often developed strategies that impressed even seasoned veterans. She had an instinct for reading terrain, understanding enemy movements, and coordinating team responses. But all of this potential was constrained by policies that treated gender as a disqualifying factor rather than focusing on individual capabilities. One evening during advanced training, Sarah sat alone cleaning her rifle while other recruits wrote letters home. She thought about her father's stories from Vietnam, about the battles that tested every soldier regardless of their background. War didn't care about gender when bullets started flying. Combat demanded courage, skill, and quick thinking. Sarah knew she possessed all of these qualities, but the system refused to let her prove it where it mattered most. The frustration grew stronger each day, but Sarah channeled it into motivation. she would be the best military police officer the Army had ever seen. She would find ways to contribute to combat operations even from the sidelines. She would wait for the right moment, the right opportunity to show everyone what she could do. What Sarah didn't know was that her chance to prove herself would come sooner than expected, in a way that would change everything she thought she knew about war, courage, and her own destiny. The bullet that would transform her life was already being manufactured in a distant factory, waiting for the moment when fate would put it in her path. Her journey from restricted soldier to combat hero was about to begin, triggered by events that would force the military to confront its own outdated assumptions about women in warfare. Sarah Martinez was ready for that challenge, even if she didn't know it yet. 3 years into her military police career, Sergeant Sarah Martinez had earned respect throughout her unit. Her fellow soldiers called her Deadeye Martinez because of her incredible accuracy with any weapon she touched. During training exercises, officers from other units would request her team specifically, knowing that Sarah's tactical insights often meant the difference between mission success and failure. But respect didn't erase the frustration that gnawed at her every day. While male soldiers with less experience and lower test scores received assignments to combat units, Sarah remained stuck in roles that kept her away from direct action. She watched as opportunities for advancement in combat specialties passed her by, not because she lacked qualifications, but because military policy treated her gender as an automatic disqualification. The assignment to Afghanistan in 2013 felt like a breakthrough moment. Sarah's MP unit would be stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a strategic location near the Pakistani border. The base supported numerous combat operations, and military police played crucial roles in convoy, security, prisoner handling, and base defense. It wasn't infantry work, but it was as close to combat operations as current regulations allowed. During pre-deployment training, Sarah's unit prepared for the realities of asymmetric warfare. Enemy fighters didn't respect traditional battle lines or military occupational specialties. Everyone at the forward operating base could become a target. Everyone needed to be ready to fight. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that military policy prohibited women from combat roles, while simultaneously deploying them to combat zones where fighting was inevitable. Her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, recognized Sarah's exceptional abilities and quietly began giving her responsibilities beyond her official job description. He included her in tactical planning sessions for convoy operations. He asked for her input on base security measures. During training exercises, he positioned her team in scenarios that tested their combat readiness, rather than just their police functions. Other soldiers noticed Sarah's expanded role and responded positively. Her reputation as a skilled marksman and tactical thinker had spread throughout the deployment rotation. Male soldiers who might have initially questioned a woman's presence in dangerous situations began seeking her advice on weapons maintenance, shooting techniques, and survival strategies. The deployment to Afghanistan opened Sarah's eyes to the complex realities of modern warfare. Traditional distinctions between combat and support roles meant little when insurgent attacks could happen, anywhere, anytime. Military police convoys faced the same improvised explosive devices as infantry patrols. Base perimeter guards encountered the same enemy fire as forward reconnaissance teams. The enemy didn't check military occupational specialties before deciding who to shoot. Sarah threw herself into every aspect of the mission with characteristic intensity. She studied local languages, memorized terrain maps, and developed relationships with Afghan interpreters who provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements. Her natural curiosity and analytical mind made her valuable for understanding the human terrain of counterinsurgency operations. During off-duty hours, Sarah continued training with weapons and tactics that went beyond her official responsibilities. She practiced with different rifle platforms, studied urban warfare techniques, and learned about explosive ordnance disposal procedures. Some officers questioned whether she was overstepping her role, but Captain Rodriguez supported her initiative, recognizing that versatile soldiers were essential for mission success. The first few months at FOB Chapman passed without major incidents, but Sarah could sense tension building in the surrounding area. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity near their location. Local Afghan partners warned about potential attacks being planned against coalition forces. The feeling in the air reminded Sarah of storm clouds gathering before a tornado touched down in her Texas hometown. During this time, Sarah began forming closer relationships with soldiers from combat units who were based at the same location. Infantry soldiers, special forces operators, and reconnaissance teams all passed through FOB Chapman during various operations. Many of these warriors had heard stories about the military police sergeant who could outshoot anyone on base, and whose tactical thinking impressed even veteran officers. These interactions both inspired and frustrated Sarah. She listened to combat. Soldiers described firefights, tactical decisions, and the brotherhood forged under enemy fire. Their stories reinforced her conviction that she belonged in combat roles, not because she wanted glory or adventure, but because she possessed skills that could save lives and complete missions. The arbitrary nature of her exclusion from their world became more obvious with each conversation. One evening, while cleaning weapons after a training exercise, a Special Forces sergeant asked Sarah a question that stuck with her for weeks afterward. He said, "Martinez, everyone here knows you're as good as any soldier I've served with. When this war is over and policies change, women like you are going to transform how we think about combat effectiveness. The question is whether those changes will come soon enough to help win this war." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but the sergeant's words also highlighted the cruel timing of her military service. She was serving during a period when women's combat exclusion policies were being questioned and debated, but actual change remained frustratingly slow. She was caught between an old system that undervalued her capabilities and a new system that hadn't yet emerged. Unknown to Sarah, events were already in motion that would force rapid change in military policies about women in combat. Her moment to prove herself was approaching faster than anyone expected, and when it arrived, there would be no time for policy debates or gradual transitions. There would only be bullets, decisions, and the ultimate test of everything she had trained for, her entire life. The morning of October 15, 2013, started like any other day at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Sarah Martinez completed her morning patrol brief at 0600 hours, checked her equipment twice, and prepared for what should have been a routine convoy escort mission to a nearby Afghan National Army outpost. Intelligence reports indicated minimal threat levels for the planned route, and weather conditions were favorable for the operation. Sarah's team consisted of 4 military police soldiers in 2 armored vehicles, providing security for a supply convoy carrying medical supplies and communications equipment to Afghan forces. The mission seemed straightforward: escort the convoy to the destination, ensure successful delivery of supplies, and return to base before evening. These types of missions had become routine over the past several months of deployment. As the yacht convoy departed the base perimeter, Sarah occupied her usual position as the gunner in the lead vehicle. From her position behind the mounted machine gun, she could scan the surrounding terrain for potential threats while maintaining communication with other team members. The landscape of eastern Afghanistan rolled past her field of view. Rocky, hills, sparse vegetation, and small villages where local residents went about their daily routines. The first part of the journey proceeded without incident. Sarah's vehicle commander, Staff Sergeant Johnson, maintained steady communication with the convoy and with base operations. Radio chatter remained calm and professional as they navigated the winding mountain roads toward their destination. Sarah felt the familiar alertness that came with combat zone operations, but nothing seemed unusual about this particular mission. Approximately halfway to their destination, the convoy encountered a roadblock that hadn't appeared in their pre-mission intelligence briefing. A group of Afghan men had positioned several large rocks across the narrow mountain road, effectively blocking vehicle passage. The lead vehicle came to a stop about 50 meters from the obstruction, while Sergeant Johnson evaluated the situation. Protocol for handling unexpected roadblocks was clear: maintain defensive positions, assess the threat level, and determine whether to clear the obstacles or find an alternate route. Sarah immediately began scanning the surrounding hills through her weapon optics, looking for signs of enemy fighters who might be using the roadblock as bait for an ambush. The tactical situation felt wrong to her experienced instincts. Through her rifle scope, Sarah spotted movement on the ridgeline above the roadblock. What appeared to be local civilians blocking the road for legitimate reasons suddenly took on a more sinister character. She counted at least 6 individuals in positions that would provide excellent fields of fire down into the kill zone, where the convoy had been forced to stop. Before Sarah could complete her threat assessment, the first shot rang out across the valley. The distinctive crack of an AK-47 rifle echoed off the surrounding mountains, immediately followed by a burst of automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. The convoy had driven directly into a carefully planned ambush, and Sarah's worst fears about the roadblock were confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in a classic L-shaped ambush formation, with the roadblock serving as the killing zone where vehicles would be forced to stop. Machine gun nests on the high ground provided overlapping fields of fire that could destroy the entire convoy within minutes. The supply trucks, loaded with valuable equipment, had become sitting targets in a carefully constructed trap. Sarah's training took over immediately as bullets began impacting around her vehicle. She identified the primary threat positions and began returning accurate fire with her mounted weapon system. Her first burst of gunfire silenced one of the enemy machine gun positions, buying precious seconds for the convoy to react and seek better defensive positions. Staff Sergeant Johnson was shouting commands over the radio, trying to coordinate a response while simultaneously maneuvering his vehicle out of the kill zone. The Afghan National Army soldiers who were supposed to be escorting the convoy had already abandoned their vehicles and sought cover behind large rocks, leaving the American military police team to handle the entire firefight alone. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more enemy fighters joined the attack from concealed positions throughout the surrounding hills. What had started as a 6-person ambush quickly escalated into a coordinated assault involving dozens of insurgent fighters. Sarah realized that her small team was facing a much larger enemy force than anyone had anticipated, based on pre-mission intelligence reports. During the first few minutes of the firefight, Sarah's marksmanship skills proved decisive in preventing the ambush from achieving its intended effect. Her accurate fire forced enemy fighters to keep their heads down instead of maintaining sustained fire on the convoy vehicles. But she also recognized that their current position was untenable against such overwhelming numbers. The convoy needed to either fight its way out of the kill zone or find a defensible position where they could hold out until reinforcements arrived. Sarah began identifying potential routes of escape while continuing to engage enemy targets. Her tactical thinking, honed through years of training and study, was being tested under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. What Sarah didn't know was that this firefight would become a turning point, not just for her own military career, but for American military policy regarding women in combat roles. The actions she was about to take in the next few hours would be analyzed, debated, and ultimately used as evidence for changing decades-old restrictions on female soldiers. But in that moment, surrounded by enemy fire and responsible for the lives of her fellow soldiers, Sarah was focused on only one thing: fighting her way out of an impossible situation through superior tactics, marksmanship, and sheer determination. 20 minutes into the firefight, Sarah Martinez realized that conventional military tactics weren't going to save her team. The enemy had chosen their ambush site perfectly, with overlapping fields of fire that made movement in any direction potentially fatal. Her mounted machine gun was running low on ammunition, and the convoy vehicles were taking increasingly accurate fire from enemy snipers positioned on the surrounding ridgelines. Staff Sergeant Johnson had been wounded in the first few minutes of the engagement when a bullet fragment from a ricocheted round cut across his shoulder. While the wound wasn't life-threatening, it limited his ability to effectively command the engagement. The other 2 soldiers in Sarah's vehicle, Specialist Rodriguez and Chen, were experienced fighters but lacked her tactical expertise and marksmanship skills. Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol in the military police handbook. She handed control of the machine gun to Specialist Chen and grabbed her personal rifle, preparing to leave the relative safety of the armored vehicle. Her plan was to move to a flanking position where she could engage the enemy snipers who were preventing the convoy from maneuvering out of the kill zone. Johnson tried to stop her, arguing that dismounted movement under enemy fire was suicide, and that military police soldiers weren't trained for that type of infantry assault. Sarah looked at her wounded sergeant and said something that would later be quoted in congressional hearings about women in combat. "Sergeant, bullets don't care about my job description. Those snipers are going to kill us all if someone doesn't take them out." Sarah's movement from the vehicle to a covered position behind a large boulder was the most terrifying 30 seconds of her life. Enemy bullets kicked up dust around her feet as she sprinted across open ground, using every piece of cover available while maintaining awareness of multiple threat directions. Her years of physical training and tactical study were compressed into pure survival instinct as she reached temporary safety. From her new position, Sarah had a clear line of sight to the enemy sniper nest that had been causing the most problems for the convoy. Using her rifle scope, she could see 2 insurgent fighters who had been systematically targeting the American vehicles. They were approximately 300 yards away, positioned behind rocks that provided excellent protection from the convoy's return fire. Sarah's first shot took out the primary sniper with a clean headshot that would have been impressive on any shooting range, let alone in the middle of a chaotic firefight. Her second shot wounded the spotter, who immediately began screaming for help and inadvertently revealed the position of additional enemy fighters who rushed to assist their wounded comrade. This created exactly the opportunity Sarah had hoped for. As enemy fighters moved from concealed positions to help their wounded colleague, they exposed themselves to her accurate rifle fire. Over the next 10 minutes, Sarah systematically eliminated 6 enemy fighters who had been controlling key terrain features around the ambush site. The psychological effect of Sarah's counterattack was as important as the tactical advantage she created. Enemy fighters who had been confidently maintaining their positions began to withdraw when they realized that an American sharpshooter had turned the tables on their carefully planned ambush. The initiative in the firefight shifted from the insurgents to the convoy defense team, but Sarah's aggressive tactics came with a price. Her movement and accurate fire had drawn the attention of every remaining enemy fighter in the area. Bullets were now converging on her position from multiple directions, and the boulder that provided her cover was being systematically chipped away by sustained machine gun fire. She needed to move again, or risk being overwhelmed by concentrated enemy fire. During her second movement, disaster struck. As Sarah sprinted between covered positions, an insurgent fighter armed with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher emerged from a hidden position and fired directly at her location. The RPG round impacted just meters from where Sarah was running, and the explosion threw her violently to the ground. Sarah felt immediate, overwhelming pain in her left leg, as shrapnel from the explosion tore through muscle and bone. Blood was soaking through her uniform, and she could see that her leg was badly wounded. But she was alive, conscious, and still holding her rifle. The enemy fighters who had witnessed the explosion began moving toward her position. Apparently, believing that she had been eliminated as a threat, they were wrong. Despite her wound, Sarah maintained her fighting position and continued engaging enemy targets. Her marksmanship remained deadly accurate, even while dealing with severe pain and blood loss. She eliminated 3 more enemy fighters who approached her position, forcing the remaining insurgents to reconsider their assault on what they had assumed was a wounded and helpless American soldier. The sound of approaching helicopters changed everything. American attack helicopters had responded to the convoy's distress calls and were now arriving on the scene with devastating firepower. The remaining enemy fighters, who had been confident about overwhelming a small military police team, suddenly found themselves facing advanced aircraft equipped with missiles and chain guns. But Sarah's ordeal wasn't over yet. Her severe leg wound required immediate medical attention, and she was losing blood at a dangerous rate. The helicopter evacuation would need to land in an area that was still potentially under enemy fire, and Sarah would need to remain conscious and combat effective until medical help could reach her position. As she lay behind cover, applying pressure to her wound while maintaining security around her position, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. She had just fought one of the most successful single-soldier engagements of the entire Afghanistan war, demonstrating exactly the kind of combat effectiveness that military policy claimed women couldn't provide. Her actions had saved the lives of her fellow soldiers and turned a potential disaster into a tactical victory. The bullet that wounded her would indeed change everything, but not in the way that enemy fighters had intended when they planned their ambush. The medical evacuation helicopter couldn't land directly at Sarah's position due to enemy fire still coming from scattered insurgent fighters in the surrounding hills. Instead, the aircraft hovered 50 feet above the ground while combat medics rappelled down to reach the wounded sergeant. Sarah remained conscious but was growing weaker from blood loss as the medical team worked to stabilize her injuries. Staff Sergeant Johnson, despite his own wound, had managed to reach Sarah's position and was providing covering fire while the medics worked. He later described finding Sarah still in a combat-ready position, rifle aimed at potential threat directions, even though she had been bleeding severely for over an hour. Her dedication to protecting her fellow soldiers continued even while she needed protection herself. The medics were amazed by what they found at Sarah's position. Scattered around her location were the bodies of 9 enemy fighters that she had eliminated during the engagement. Empty rifle magazines indicated that she had fired over 200 rounds with exceptional accuracy while under intense enemy fire. One of the medics, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, said he had never seen such effective shooting from a wounded soldier. During the helicopter flight to the combat hospital at Bagram Airfield, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, but continued asking about the status of her team members. The flight medic assured her that everyone from the convoy had survived, largely because her counterattack had prevented the enemy from overrunning their positions. Her actions had turned what could have been a catastrophic loss into a tactical victory for American forces. The surgical team at Bagram worked for 6 hours to repair the damage to Sarah's left leg. Shrapnel from the RPG explosion had shattered her femur and severed several blood vessels, requiring multiple procedures to save her leg and restore circulation. The doctors warned that she might never walk normally again, let alone continue her military career, but they had underestimated Sarah's determination and physical resilience. News of the firefight spread quickly through military channels, but initial reports focused on the tactical details rather than Sarah's individual performance. The official after-action report described a successful defense against an insurgent ambush, with 1 American soldier wounded and 14 enemy fighters killed. Sarah's name wasn't mentioned in early press releases because of military policies that restricted media attention to combat actions by female soldiers. However, the soldiers who had witnessed Sarah's performance weren't content to let her story remain buried in classified reports. Staff Sergeant Johnson wrote a detailed account of the engagement that he submitted through official channels, specifically documenting Sarah's tactical decisions and marksmanship skills. Other members of the convoy team provided supporting statements that confirmed the accuracy of Johnson's report. Captain Rodriguez, Sarah's commanding officer, recognized that this engagement represented something unprecedented in modern military history. A military police soldier, officially prohibited from combat roles because of her gender, had demonstrated combat effectiveness that exceeded the performance of many infantry soldiers. Her actions challenged fundamental assumptions about women's capabilities in direct combat situations. The story gained momentum when a combat correspondent who was embedded with Special Forces units heard about the engagement from soldiers at Bagram. Despite initial resistance from military public affairs officers, the correspondent investigated the story and confirmed the details through multiple sources. His article, published 3 weeks after the firefight, brought national attention to Sarah's performance and raised uncomfortable questions about military gender policies. Congressional representatives, who had been advocating for changes in women's combat restrictions, seized on Sarah's story as evidence for their arguments. They argued that her performance proved that individual capabilities mattered more than gender classifications, and that military effectiveness was being reduced by policies that excluded qualified women from combat roles. The Pentagon's response was cautious and defensive. Official spokespeople emphasized that Sarah's actions, while commendable, represented an exceptional circumstance rather than evidence for policy change. They argued that individual examples couldn't be used to justify wholesale changes to military organizational structure, and that current policies remained appropriate for most situations. But Sarah's story was already inspiring other women in the military who had faced similar restrictions on their career opportunities. Female soldiers across all service branches began sharing their own experiences with combat situations, where official policies didn't match battlefield realities. A movement was building that would become impossible for military leadership to ignore. Meanwhile, Sarah was focused on her physical rehabilitation and her desire to return to duty as quickly as possible. The doctors at Bagram had been wrong about her recovery timeline. Through intense physical therapy and sheer determination, she was walking again within 6 weeks of her surgery. Her goal was to return to Afghanistan and continue serving with her unit, regardless of whatever policy debates were happening in Washington. The leg wound had healed, but Sarah soon discovered that the bullet that wounded her had indeed changed everything. Military leadership was now paying attention to her career in ways that created new opportunities, but also new challenges. She was about to become a symbol in a debate that was much larger than any individual soldier's story. During her recovery period, Sarah received visitors from senior military officers, Pentagon officials, and congressional staff members who wanted to hear her first-hand account of the engagement. Each conversation reinforced her belief that women deserved equal opportunities to serve in combat roles based on their individual qualifications rather than gender-based assumptions. The recognition was gratifying, but Sarah was more interested in returning to duty than becoming a spokesperson for policy change. She wanted to get back to the work of being a soldier, even though that work was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. 6 months after the firefight that changed her life, Sergeant Sarah Martinez found herself sitting in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., wearing her dress uniform with a chest full of medals that included the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The same military that had once told her she couldn't serve in combat roles was now using her story as a centerpiece for historic policy changes. The transformation had been remarkable and swift. Within weeks of Sarah's story becoming public, military leadership faced unprecedented pressure to justify policies that seemed obviously contradictory to battlefield realities. How could they argue that women weren't qualified for combat roles when a military police sergeant had just demonstrated combat effectiveness that exceeded the performance of most infantry soldiers? Sarah's testimony to Congress was straightforward and powerful. She didn't focus on gender politics or policy debates. Instead, she described the tactical situation she had faced, the decisions she had made, and the training that had prepared her for combat. Her message was simple: evaluate soldiers based on their individual capabilities, not their gender. Give everyone the opportunity to serve where their skills can be most effective. The congressional hearing room was packed with military officers, policy experts, and journalists who recognized they were witnessing a historic moment. Sarah's calm, professional demeanor as she described eliminating 9 enemy fighters while wounded impressed even skeptical representatives who had initially opposed changes to combat exclusion policies. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah was asked about the moment she decided to leave her armored vehicle and engage enemy snipers in direct combat. Her answer became one of the most quoted statements in military policy debates. "I didn't think about whether I was supposed to be in combat or not. I thought about my fellow soldiers who were going to die if someone didn't take action. That's what soldiers do." The Pentagon announced major policy changes within months of Sarah's congressional testimony. Women would be allowed to serve in previously restricted combat roles, including infantry, armor, and special forces units, provided they met the same physical and mental standards required of male soldiers. The changes would be implemented gradually, with careful monitoring to ensure unit effectiveness remained high. Sarah was among the first women to take advantage of the new policies. Despite having opportunities to pursue easier assignments or public relations roles, she chose to attend Ranger School, one of the most challenging military training programs available to any soldier. Her performance there silenced remaining critics who questioned whether the policy changes were based on political considerations rather than military effectiveness. The Ranger course tested everything Sarah had learned about leadership, tactics, and physical endurance. She faced the same brutal training regimen as male students, with no modifications or special considerations. Some fellow students and instructors were initially skeptical about women's ability to meet Ranger standards, but Sarah's performance quickly earned their respect. During one particularly challenging phase of Ranger training, Sarah's patrol was tasked with conducting a simulated night raid on an enemy position. As patrol leader, she developed a tactical plan that impressed instructors with its creativity and attention to detail. The mission succeeded because Sarah had learned to combine traditional military tactics with innovative approaches that took advantage of her team's specific strengths. Sarah graduated from Ranger School in the top 10% of her class, earning the right to wear the coveted Ranger tab that signified completion of one of the military's most demanding leadership courses. The achievement was personally satisfying, but more importantly, it demonstrated that women could meet the same standards as men when given equal opportunities. Her next assignment was to an infantry unit deploying to Afghanistan, where she would serve as a rifle platoon leader responsible for conducting combat operations against insurgent forces. It was exactly the type of assignment that had been impossible just 2 years earlier, before a single bullet changed everything about American military policy. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some soldiers in Sarah's new unit were initially uncomfortable with female leadership in combat roles. Others questioned whether unit cohesion would be affected by gender integration. Sarah addressed these concerns through consistent professional performance and by demonstrating that effective leadership transcended gender considerations. During her deployment as an infantry officer, Sarah led multiple combat operations that resulted in successful mission completion with minimal casualties among her soldiers. Her tactical expertise, developed through years of study and practical experience, proved valuable in the complex environment of counterinsurgency operations. Fellow officers began seeking her input on operational planning and tactics. The broader impact of Sarah's story extended far beyond her individual career success. Women throughout the military were inspired by her example to pursue opportunities that had previously been closed to them. The combat exclusion policies that had once seemed permanent and unchangeable had been swept away by the undeniable evidence of female combat effectiveness. 5 years after the firefight that nearly cost Sarah her leg, she was promoted to major and selected to command an infantry company, preparing for deployment to a new conflict zone. The young woman who had once been told she couldn't serve in combat roles was now responsible for training and leading 300 soldiers in direct combat operations. Sarah's story became part of military history, studied in leadership courses, and cited in policy discussions about organizational change and adaptation. But for Sarah herself, the recognition was secondary to the satisfaction of serving where her skills could be most effective. The bullet that wounded her had indeed changed everything, opening doors that had been closed for generations of qualified women. The military that had once blocked her from combat duty now relied on her expertise to train the next generation of combat leaders, both male and female, who would serve without the arbitrary restrictions that had once defined military service. Sarah Martinez had proven that courage, skill, and dedication were the only qualifications that mattered when bullets started flying.